live from Redmond, it's Patrick Rogers.
Good morning, everybody. We are, in fact, in Redmond. We're all sitting in a room together, which is a rare occasion. We got Vesa and Bert is with us as well, joining in today. Here for the MVP Summit, but wanted this morning to, of course, do our Sharepoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group bi-weekly call. It's November 11th, 2016. And we've got a pretty good agenda for you today, and two really great demos from the community, so I'm excited about that. But we did want to, as always, start off with what is the Special Interest Group all about? What are we here to do? The Special Interest Group is part of the larger SharePoint Patterns and Practices program, which exists under SharePoint Engineering in the product group. Cannot hear a thing.
Interesting. Okay, let's rewind. Let's get this one away from the recording. So let's double check the audio. We are all in the same room, so.
Fine.
Okay, Kevin is good. Yeah, we tested the audio with Kevin.
No audio for Robert. Fine for me. Huh.
Okay.
Okay.
Fine for as well. Okay. So if there's an audio issues, probably restarting the invite is the best thing to do. Because clearly, if some people are catching this, we're good. Good. Thanks.
Okay. Great. Lost my place.
Yes.
Did my whole thing. Part of.
Get back on the script.
Yep, back on script. Part of the larger SharePoint Patterns and Practices program, and what the special interest groups do is allow folks with a special interest in certain topic areas. So this one is client-side development. We've also got one for the PowerShell and the core library components, as well, a bi-weekly meeting. So if you can, of course, attend both. You can attend one, the other, kind of wherever you have that interest. But it lets folks have a little bit more deeper dive into these special topics, because as the program was growing, the monthly call just wasn't enough to cover everything. And so we decided to sort of break things out, provide a little bit more focus in certain areas. What we do during the calls is we have an open discussion and update on what's new with the SharePoint framework. We're still on pre-release drop number 5, which has been out now for a week and a half, 2 weeks, something like that. But getting a lot of great feedback on that as always, so really appreciate that from the community. And then as well, we talk about the JavaScript core component that we've built and is available. That just went out in 1.06. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. And then 2 links down at the bottom. The SharePoint PnP community is what we've now replaced Yammer with. It's the Microsoft Tech community. That's where you can go for questions, discussions, things like that, especially around the SharePoint framework. And then we've got dev.office.com/SharePoint. That is your jumping off point for everything SharePoint development. So SharePoint framework, as well as all the classic development, which is still obviously 100% valid, 100% still used. So if you have questions on that, also SharePoint community or dev.office.com are the great resources to have there. And specific to the core component, you can also use the Gitter channel. Is a great place as well, and that's linked off the homepage of the project. So moving on, specifically this week, what are we going to talk about? Updates to the SharePoint framework. Not a lot there. The big last update was release number 5, but we'll touch on some stuff there. Some updates around the JS core component, and then we've got 2 great community demos. One from Kevin talking about managing state in these client-side frameworks with Redux and Mobux, and then Sergey is going to talk about using the JS core from Node. Those of you who might be familiar with Sergey with his work on things like SPSave and some of the SP authentication libraries. And then hopefully at the end, we'll have time for an open discussion, Q&A, so you can have a chance to ask us questions or ask the folks that did the demos questions as well. You can always ask things in the IM window. We'll do our best to keep up with that. Pardon me. So jumping into the Sharepoint Framework developer preview updates.
Yeah, so, and my animations are completely messed up, so that's fine. Let's actually, yeah, thank you. So nothing really super new from a 2 weeks perspective. So we are still on the top 5, like Patrick mentioned. The following thing is that we're looking already at this point to come up with a release candidate relatively soon. Again, sooner or later is a relative thing, but the following drop will be already a release candidate. And then after that, we're moving to GA. So all of our engineers who are actually building the SPFx are super busy on finalizing the whole setup, so we can actually push out the first version of the SPFx out relatively soon. It's not a matter of days, but still. And obviously, we don't want to push. Well, let's not actually even speculate that. Cool. The other thing what will happen is that we are opening up the developer preview also for first release tenants. So you will then be able to start using the Sharepoint framework if you are using a tenant which has the first release tag enabled. There will be warning signs. There will be message posts in the tenant messaging center, and we clearly want to make sure that people do understand that. That's still a developer preview. You should not use SPFx at that point yet in production, even though it will work in the first release tenants. We will announce whenever we are ready for GA. Essentially, GA means general availability, and you're able to start using the Sharepoint framework in across Office 365 or Sharepoint Online at this point. The new sample, we have quite a lot of new samples. So the November monthly communications went out on Monday or Tuesday. We're slightly messed up from our typical schedule perspective to this week's MVP Summit because we're meeting MVPs here. And especially for me, when I'm in Redmond, I don't get anything done because I'm meetings all day long, which is messing up slightly the schedule from our side as well. But there's a lot of new samples as part of the November release. There's already additional stuff in queue. So Kevin Mees is going to, for example, show us today some patterns for React-based client-side web parts development, which are already as a pull request waiting to get processed. And we'll get those one in queue to the developer dev branch quite soon, and then they will be released with the December release, which is coming up in a few weeks as well. There's new webcasts released as well, more coming soon. So next Monday's webcast is around SPFx as well. So the last webcast was around how to use your existing JavaScript implementations or customizations which you built in the context of Sharepoint Framework. The next one is around building multi-page or multi-view client-side web parts. So how do you remain the state in an Angular case, in an Angular implementation, and we're working on a React-based sample as well. And more articles and documentation is in queue for dev.office.com/SharePoint. The following slide is essentially just listing what do we have as a new samples. So as part of the November release, which went live, like mentioned on Monday, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, well, 9 or 8 new samples. A lot of them are from community, so thank you for those because they are extremely valuable for people learning how to get started with Sharepoint Framework. Some of them are super simple and they show a specific scenario, and that's by an intention, so they're not production-ready samples. Some of them are much more complex, and they combine multiple different services like Flow or Bot Framework and so on. So there's multiple different scenarios then combined in the sample. And we're kind of taking the similar kind of approach what we did with the classic PnP with the adding model, where we will provide the community simplistic samples, so they're not uber complex, not necessarily production ready, but they concentrate on showing certain scenario. So you're able to learn the scenario, and then you're able to start using that within your production ready web parts. https github.com/SharePoint SPFx web parts is the repository where we're actually getting this in and sharing them out. There's quite a lot of work also coming sooner or later from the engineering guys, so we're working on that one as well. As an example, the Angular 2 prototype is something which came out of the SharePoint engineering, together with the work what we did with Angular 2 guys. So we are actually working with Google on some of this stuff as well. So making sure that we're aligning on the models and their stuff is working properly with us, and vice versa. It's a completely different world nowadays, which is super cool. On videos and webcasts, so like mentioned, the new video will come out next Monday. It's around building multi-view web parts with Angular, and how to handle essentially the UI states transitions. And there's a lot of existing webcasts out there. We're trying to keep these webcasts nowadays quite short, so they're like 15 to 30 minutes max, and concentrating on one topic. So you will more easily find a time to have a look on it, or whenever you are then implementing stuff in the future after GA, you can go back and see the webcast and, okay, that's how it's actually done. Excellent, I'll just copy this to example and get moving on my implementation. And those are all in the PnP YouTube video section, where we have a lot of other videos as well. But I think that sums up the SharePoint Framework status. Like mentioned, not super massive amount new from engineering side, but a lot of new samples to have a look, a lot of new samples to play with, and we'll come up with a new stuff from an engineering side relatively soon as well.
And it's not tied directly to the SharePoint Framework, but we did record as well a really cool, we got the whole core team together, so that'll be coming out sometime in the next couple of weeks here at the MVP Summit. So that'll be a really, I think, interesting thing for folks out in the community to listen to, just because it's a quick hit on hearing about all the different stuff the Patterns and Practices is working on. So that'll be a fun thing as well. It talks about SharePoint Framework, but it talks about everything else as well. So that just popped into my head as we were talking about webcasts. So that'll be cool. So that's upcoming as well. So now, update on what's been going on with the JS core component, and thank you as always to our contributors. Really appreciate all the great work that goes on there. And actually this morning before I woke up, somebody had asked a question, and somebody else, Mauricio, had actually answered that question before I was even out of bed this morning. So great work to both of folks asking and answering. So awesome to see people helping each other. That's really, really exciting. It really helps build the community up and helps support everybody learning more. So what's been going on? We released 1.0.6 this week. So new features largely driven by great feedback from the community. So both suggestions for new functionality and issues being reported. So really appreciate hearing from the community on those topics, and then hopefully showing that we take that feedback to heart and made changes and updates to the library to support that feedback. So really appreciate it. Keep that going. As you're out there using the library, just let us know if you run into trouble or have ideas on making it better, because that, again, feeds back to benefit everybody. So also, as we've been out here, we've been meeting with the product group, which is really exciting, I think, for all of us in the program, for the Patterns and Practices program. We're getting a little bit closer to engineering, as well as I did want to share, engineering wanted to recognize the great work everybody in the community's done, and so I'm sort of extending their thank you to all of you to say thank you as well for the great work. So they're really impressed, I have to say, with the Patterns and Practices program and what all of you have been doing. So feel good about that. That's the praise doesn't come lightly from that team. So very cool to get that recognition for all the great work all of you have been doing. So thank you.
You mean my team?
Vase's team, yeah. Vase is he's a taskmaster. And then did want to touch on again, issues are being reported. Thank you for that. Really appreciate it. We were able to fix all the current issues for the release. So that's great. So keep those issues and ideas coming. As well, do want to remind folks, if you find an issue and have some time, you can always submit a pull request to address that issue as well. So got a few of those in the last release as well. So that's really fantastic from the community. 2 links down there at the bottom, again, to the tech community, and then to the Gitter page, which is also a great place for sort of informal, quick questions. I've seen a lot of good conversations on both places. So those are how to get involved, how to jump in, and how to reach out to us. Opportunities to contribute, really unchanged. I think next week I'm going to update this, or for the next meeting, I'm going to update this slide just somehow. But the big thing, I want to remind folks, if you would like to write a web part or do something with SharePoint Framework or the JavaScript core, and would like to show it off on this call, just let us know. We'd love having the demos from the community. It really showcases what folks are doing out there, as well as scenarios that we may not even have thought of ourselves, to see what people do with the SharePoint framework in the library. So keep that stuff coming. We've got 2 great demos, I think, right now from the community. So Kevin, if you are on the line.
Yep, I am.
Cool. Great. Do you want to take over the presentation? You should be up as a presenter.
Sure. Okay.
Excellent. Seems to be working.
Cool. I hope my internet is fast enough. I'm on mobile, but it should be fine, I guess.
Yeah, it depends on the country.
Yeah. We'll see. If something is laggy or something, just tell me.
Yep.
Okay. I've got it on my side.
Okay.
I got it as well, and then it went away.
It went away.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
I think it actually broke.
Try again.
Yep.
Still working?
Loading now.
Loading. Looks promising. And got it.
Yep.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. So I want to talk about state management in SharePoint Web Parts today. And actually, it's not that specific to SharePoint Web Parts specific, but more to React apps. So it's basically the same principle as in every React application, but applied to web parts, which basically gives you the same benefits. So I know a lot of guys are new to React development, and I did this for a while now, so I'm probably a bit more knowledgeable. And the basic problem is that, so this is the samples repository, and how all of the web parts usually look like in the beginning is that a lot of the logic is actually implemented directly in the components. Like this is, for example, the do container, and all the logic, like update logic, fetching items, is done in this component will receive props function. You just compare, like, did this property change? And then I need to load data and set a state of my component. And if something else happens, I set another state. And this is fine for like small web parts. But the problem is that as your web part grows, or your application, stuff can get really messy. And it's really hard to get like an overview over the complete application state and just see what actually currently is loaded, and or if something throws an error, where do you store the error, and how do you get it to other components. All those questions are usually starting to come up as your web part grows bigger. And what I want to show you today is basically how to solve those problems with 2 different frameworks. And another thing that they try to solve is that currently your web part is your main component, kinda, or it renders your main component right here. And everything that you want to pass down to your subcomponents, you actually have to pass down as properties. And depending on how big your web part is, this can be like a 4 or 5 level hierarchy. And so you have to pass those properties down basically all the hierarchy tree, which gets tedious to write and hard to update, because if you want to add another one, you have to pass it down the whole chain basically, which is not that nice. And yeah, those 2 frameworks basically want to solve those problems by giving you a nicer way to handle the application state. Also, if there are some questions, I don't see the chat, but probably Vesa, can you watch it and then
yes, absolutely. I'll jump in if there's any specific.
Cool. That would make it easier for me. Okay. So basically there are 2 frameworks that currently try to solve the state management in React applications. The first one is MobX, which is a bit newer, I would say, and it's a bit easier in the beginning to learn, because MobX is basically an object-oriented framework. And the basic idea is that first you define your store, which is just the object that holds all your application state. So no state lives in the components, but everything lives in a store. And for this demo, the idea is basically to store all the properties that the user can enter in the web part in this store and not directly in the component itself. And so basically we have our global store, which just has a web part store as a substore. And this substore has a properties object, or a map in that case, which stores all the properties that the user can edit on the property pane. And the special thing about Mobix is that this is actually a reactive library. So you need to use this add observable decorator on the property or on the field to make it observable for all the components that use the data. So the basic principle is actually quite easy, but instead of arrays or objects, you have maps, and observable maps and observable arrays. But the API is exactly the same as native JavaScript classes. So everyone who has used a reactive library like RxJS before is probably familiar with this stuff, but it's actually quite easy. And a lot of magic is happening in the background, so you don't have to do a lot. This is basically all we need to do to define our store. And in our web part, we basically create a new store as a private field. And now the magic is that we hook into the lifecycle methods of the web part, which is called onPropertyChanged, which allows us to update our stores with the new properties that are set by the user in the property pane. So basically all we need to do is basically tell our store, then especially the web part store, that our properties change and we want to set the new property path, which is what did we define here? So we just defined a name property, and so property path will be name and new value will be the new value that the user entered. And this is basically how we tell our store that something changed and that you should update it. And we also do this on init to load the stored properties or the saved properties by the user. So this is basically a one-time setup for the web part. And we just tell it to clear all the properties and then merge those properties that are set on the web part. So I guess the web part stores this on in the local storage of the browser during development. So this gets loaded and on init is then called, and then you have the properties. That's actually quite easy. There's also, like in non-reactive web parts, there's another callback or another lifecycle method, which is called onAfterPropertyPaneChange is applied, which basically is called after the user clicks the apply button. I will just show this in a minute. And here we basically have to do the same as in the onInit method. Just, update all the properties in the store with the new properties that the web part gives us. And the one thing that you actually have to look out for is that the onPropertyChange callback is also invoked if the reactive flag is disabled. So we have to check if it's disabled, and then we don't want to update anything because then the changes will be pushed directly to our subcomponents, even though the user didn't click the apply button. Okay, so that's like how we hook up our store with the web part. Are there any questions for that part? Guess not. Okay. And now the question basically is, how do we get our state that is stored in our store to our components? And there are actually two elements to that. The first one is this provider component that is supplied by Mobix React, which are the React bindings from Mobix for React. And the only thing we need to do here is basically pass all our sub-stores as properties to this provider. So we just spread everything, which is basically the same as writing this one. So we just want to access all the substores because our store is just a collection of substores, and our components probably just want to have access to a specific substore. So I spread this store into the component. I could also do something like this. It doesn't really matter that much, and then remove the rest. But I like to spread all the substores. That's just personal preference, but it still works. And then what I like to do is make a difference between container components, which are stored in containers, and components. And the difference is that container components are basically the smart components. So I will show you. This is a default container. And all the containers are hooked up with our global state, so with our stores. And they are responsible for fetching the data and pass it to the components, which are just dumb components that just present some data, but they don't load it, they don't do anything with the data, they just present it to the user. So those are like visual components, but they are dumb. They don't have any logic. I can show this too. Our greeter, for example. So this does nothing else than just render our data. And the container is actually responsible for fetching the data. So how do you actually fetch it? Well, there's also from the React bindings, there's this inject method that you can use to hook up this function with our store and then tell the component what it actually wants, or tell the store what you want to retrieve. So we get like the complete store, what we pass to the provider, and then we say, okay, we want to get our web part, which is store.web part, as a property into our component. This might be a bit hard to read in the beginning because it's a lot of functional stuff, but it works. You probably just need to copy this from the README of MobX, but it works. You could also use like the decorator pattern, but it doesn't work for functional components, which this is, so it will probably be a bit easier to read. Another thing that we need is to add this observer to our default container, just that MobX knows that whenever something changes, this component should be updated. And then we just get from our web part store like all the properties and tell them what field we want to get. So this might look a bit more complex, but it's actually not that hard. There's also like this nice Y1 method supplied by MobX, which tells you exactly why this update was performed when it re-renders, which is quite nice to get like an initial feeling for it. I will just show you this one. Let me just get it running. Okay, so basically what this does is just renders the name that we input here, and it updates the field directly. And we basically see here that the Y1 method was called like 4 times. So for every input I enter, I get a new update. And it basically says that default container free.render was called because something changed in well, actually this is a bit bad to read because it's a map, so the output is not that nice. I will show you in the Redux example, the output is a bit nicer, but just trust me that it works. Also a nice thing that we can do now is in the web part actually, maybe you saw that one, I only need to render the web part once, because what the default implementation of the web part does is that it renders the whole web part. So basically it calls this So it creates and renders the whole React stuff each time a property changes, which might not be an optimal thing, because if you do a lot of loading in your component did mount, or a lot of computation, or a lot of async calls, you do this every time something changes, which is not that performant. But because now everything goes directly to the store, and the React bindings update our subcomponents that subscribe to those stores, we just have to render the main web part once, and everything works. So this is quite a big performance optimization if you do a lot of async stuff in your components. Cool. So I hope this was kind of okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a side comment from the presentation, and obviously we were just chatting that in the room as well. So this super valuable sample actually, because it shows the pattern, and obviously. Thank you, Patrick. It does require the basic understanding of SPFx and the React to be able to understand the value of what you're actually showing in the mobile. Yeah. But this is, so from my perspective and the whole team perspective, this is exactly what we're looking for at this point as a samples as well, because this is simplistic. Yes, it's not a wow effect from a UI perspective, but it actually shows a pattern. It explains how it behaves.
Components way cleaner, I guess. So you have a better overview.
Exactly.
I just want to show you the direct stuff short.
Yeah.
It basically does exactly the same thing, but the way Redux handles the state updates is a bit different. But it's actually even better from a developer perspective to actually get an overview about your complete state. Yeah. So I just want to show this, and then the console output will be a lot cleaner and then probably a bit easier to understand. So Redux is a more functional approach to the whole state management thing, but a lot of stuff is actually the same. So we still create a store, which is typed for our complete state in our web part. We still have to only render it once, and there's also this kind of provider component that does some magic, and we tell it what store we want to use for this component. And we still hook up to the lifecycle methods of the web part, but this time we tell our store to dispatch the update property or apply property action. And I will just show you how this looks like exactly. So those update property, apply properties are actually action creators that create an action that we dispatch then in our store. So that's like the names that you have to learn if you want to use Redux. So action creators create actions, and actions are dispatched to the store, and the reducers, which I will come to now, basically handle those actions and update the state in the store. That's how it basically works. And if we look at our reducers, we have a web part reducer that basically defines two actions. One is which is called update property, and the second one I called apply properties. And the only difference is that apply properties takes all properties and updates all of them, and update property only takes like one property name and the value and updates this specific property in the state. We can also define like what does this like substore look like, and it also has just this property. We can define initial state. This is the default state when the application loads. And what our reducer does is this here. Reducer is a pure function that takes a state and an action and returns like the new state. And it's a pure function because it shouldn't modify the state, but create a new state object and return this one, which gives you a lot of nice stuff like easy testing and even like time travel debugging and stuff like that. So this is really awesome. But I think I don't have time to show it today. So how does this work? Well, as I said, we get an action. And so this is really nice in TypeScript because we can say, okay, I get an action, which is either update property action or apply property action. And then we do a switch case on the type. And TypeScript will do all the hard stuff to actually give us intelligence for everything, which is really awesome. So in case of a single update property thing, we just copy the state by using object design, empty object, and the state, which basically just copies the whole state. And then we say also copy over the properties object by copying the whole properties object and just assigning one field or one property with that name to this value that we get. So this syntax might not be familiar with you if you haven't used a lot of ES6, but this is basically the same as, let me write some pseudocode, which is basically const new state is copy state. Let's say we have a copy method that does this, and then new state action dot property name is like action dot value. So this is basically the same as this one. I hope this is kind of understandable. But you get used to those stuff if you write a lot of reduces. Anyway, so for apply properties, we basically do the same, except that we just copy the complete properties object over. Those are the two action creators that I just showed, and those create just a plain action object, which just holds the type and the payload, which is a property name and a value, or all the properties in the other case. Cool. This is basically everything you need to do. So it's more typing with Redux, but it's a lot less magic, and you basically have more control over what happens. So this is nicer if you don't like magic in your code, which I do. Let me just fire up the example, and then we get some nice output. So I will add another reactive web part. And what we see here that the action was handled by the store, and it was the apply properties action. So this was this happened on the init callback, and we see what state we had before, and this was just like an empty property object, or not an empty, but name was basically empty. And our action had this this properties object, so the disable reactive property, which was additionally passed to it, and then our new state is basically everything updated. This is really nice because if I now add some input, we see that for every keystroke I do, a new update property is invoked, or a new update property action is dispatched to the store. And we see that, while I type, the value changes. And I can see for every action what was the state before and after. And this gives you a lot of power if you debug stuff or want to know how something works, right? And how does this get to the components? So the components are basically exactly the same as in the MobX example. They don't have any logic at all. They just take properties and present it to the user. But our container looks a bit different. This is just the Redux version of what we did before. So how Redux works is basically we say map state to props, which is basically get me all the state, and I want to extract from those global application state, like the name and the reactive property, which is stored in state part properties name, blah, blah, blah. And those two values get passed to the container with the same name, basically, and then we render them. And then we use the connect method, which is defined in the React bindings for Redux, give it the map state to props function and our container, and it works. So that's basically all the magic there is to hook up the state with the container. That's basically it. I also have like another example, which does some async stuff, which actually makes it useful, I guess, except for just storing properties, but I don't know if I have time for that.
We have the second demo also queued up, because actually this would be an awesome time if there's any questions. So I know that Bill Ayers tried to jump on the when we were presenting, and just there was a question from Bill that is this like a view model? But not precisely, but it's separation of concerns. And essentially both of these are implementations of Flux. So thinking on how do we can centrally remain the state.
Yeah. So the idea is actually
feel free to elaborate.
To separate your state, your application state, from your components that render it. If you use like component state to store your application state, you basically need those components to live, right? Because the state is stored in them. But if you store your state and your components, separately, you can just use another completely new UI layer or whatever to render that state, or just switch out components how you like, because now instead of a list, you want to have some tab control or whatever, but you really don't care because the state is already there and it works. You just have to pass them to other components, right? So that's like the big win, in my opinion.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
Okay, so in that case, it's not so much a view model, it's just a model, isn't it? It's a model.
Yeah.
But if it's more, is it the view? Are you storing the view state in there, or are you storing the model itself?
It's more the model, because actually some components may have their own state. Like let's take, for example, a drop-down control, and that wants to store if it's toggled or not, right? So if it has to display like the list of items or just the value, the selected value. And you probably don't want to store this information in your application state, right?
Agreed. Yeah, that's a control state.
Yeah, so you don't want to store that in Redux. I saw some people do that. That's not what it's for. It's like your whole complete application state, right? So you have to think about what data do I actually need in my component, what data do the components need, and then structure it accordingly.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. But both frameworks are really good. Also, I have some key takeaways that I stole from a blog. I actually linked the blog post last time. So basically how you should learn this stuff is like learn React and set state first, like storing everything in components. And if you use that a lot, you might find out why it's not a good idea to do that all the time. Then maybe have a look at MobX, because it's easier to get used to it, especially if you don't like functional approaches or not used to functional programming. And then move to Redux as the project grows bigger or the web part grows bigger. But I think web parts are usually a bit smaller in scope, so you probably don't need to use Redux. I prefer Redux over MobX anyway, because I don't know, I just like it more. But it's personal preferences. And but still the container and presenter components pattern is still valid for both and really useful. Even if you use something else for state management, splitting your components in containers like smart components and presentation components like the dump ones is really good. It saves you a lot of trouble later. So this is probably one of the key takeaways that you should get out of this talk. Yeah, I think that's it.
Cool, Kevin, thanks for that one. I think we need to move into Sergey, so we have a time to get that one included as well. And I really, by the way, like the key takeaways, pointing them out in the demo as well. And great demos and super valuable stuff. Like mentioned, or Sergey, you can actually just steal the presentation for your screen, and we can keep on chatting before that starts. But like mentioned, this obviously requires some level of an understanding, already previous knowledge on client-side web parts, but super valuable for those who've started the client-side web part development already. But yeah. Sergey, so let's switch to you and get moving on that one.
Okay, thank you guys. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, guys?
Yep, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, can you see my desktop?
Yes, almost done.
Okay, cool. So, hello everyone. My name is Sergey, and I want to show you a really small demo around using PnP.js core with server-side JavaScript or with Node.js. You know that in order to use SharePoint REST API, you need to authenticate all your requests. And when you're working inside SharePoint context with PnP.js core from the browser, you already have all authentication data available. And this data usually is sent automatically by the browser via HTTP request, like cookies, for example. And for Node.js, things are different. And for Node.js, you need to obtain all authentication data by your own. And also you need to attach this authentication data to your every HTTP request. And depending on the app type you are creating, for example, that might be SharePoint web application or some console application, or maybe even arrow function. You can use different approaches or different Node.js modules in order to obtain authentication. For that, for my current demo, I'm going to use my own Node.js module called Node SPOs, and I'm going to use it in order to get authentication data. Let me show you some really small demo around Node SPOs and how to use it. You see this GitHub page. So actually, this small module contains only one method called getAuth. You need to pass your SharePoint URL and some credential options object. These credential options depends on your authentication strategy. And currently Node SPO supports different authentication strategies listed here. So you can use admin-only permissions, you can use user credentials, and you can even use ADFS user credentials. And all that works for both SharePoint Online and on-premise installations. And let me some small demonstration around Node SPOs. So I'm getting SPOs via require. Now I'm calling getAuth method, passing my local on-premise SharePoint, and I'm using ADFS credentials. You see my username, domain, super strong password, and reline party, and ADFS URL. Right after that, here via promises, I am receiving some authentication headers. So let me run it to make a little bit bigger. Just node index.js, and we will see that I've just received my authentication header. That's actually fed out cookies. This cookie needs to be attached to every HTTP request, and we are good to go. We can query our SharePoint REST API without any problem. And now let's go to PnP.js core. That's another sample. Let me show you the main index.ts. This sample also available at GitHub, so you can easily clone it, configure and run, and see it in action. If you're familiar with PnP.js core component, you may know that PnP.js core uses window fetch implementation in order to send HTTP queries to SharePoint. And for Node.js, the trick is to replace global fetch implementation with Node.js version. And actually, it's not a big deal, and this can be done pretty easily, I would say. You see this around 20 lines of code, how you can do that. For Node.js, I'm using a special Node.js module called Node Fetch. That's Windows.fetch implementation for Node.js. I need to assign some global variables. This is required for PnP.js core. And then, as I said before, to override global.fetch function. So what I'm doing here, I'm overriding global fetch, and Also, as I said before, I need authentication data for HTTP request. So before performing the actual request, I need to get this data using Node.sp auth library right there. So I'm getting my authentication headers, passing some credentials. Let me show these credentials. This is the same credentials I showed you a few minutes before. This is my local on-premise ADFS user. So I'm passing these credentials. I'm getting authentication headers, cookies. I'm attaching these cookies to my fetch options right there. And now I'm ready to return my fetch implementation with authentication already available. So basically that's it. That's all you need to do in order to use PnP.js core from Node.js. And now at this part you can use PnP.js core. For example, I'm creating new PnP.web object, which is available in the latest version of PnP.js core. I'm getting the web, printing web title, I'm creating new subweb, and I'm getting subweb title. Later, you see I'm getting all the web's lists, and I'm printing all the lists titles. So let me also demonstrate this. I'm using npm scripts for that purpose. Let me npm run build. So now it's transpiling TypeScript and actually running it. And you see my web title, my sub-web title, and my list under the sub-web. So we can, just for testing purposes, we can open our sub-site and just copy this URL. And let's say I want to change this title to something different. Click Save. And now let's run it again. And you see that my new list title is coming also. So basically that's it. This was a small demonstration on how you can integrate PnP.js core into your Node.js application. In this sample, I used my own Node.js module for unattended Sharepoint authentication, but depending on your needs, you may use different approach, but approach for overriding a global fetch object in order to make PnP.js core to work with Node.js is pretty similar. So that's it from my side. Maybe let me check some questions.
Any questions from Sergey?
Really great stuff. It's really cool to see how easy it is to sort of override that, and then the different auth options, I think, really opens up a lot of possibilities for folks that are writing Node.js apps against SharePoint.
Yeah.
Really cool stuff.
Yes, I see the question around app-only credentials. Yes, you can use app-only with both on-premise and SharePoint Online. If you open GitHub project, there is a wiki, and under the wiki you can find detailed steps you need to perform in order to configure app-only, and some very basic samples how to use app-only along other examples.
Super valuable. Super valuable.
Great, we got a little bit of time. Are there any other questions, just general questions, or for Sergey or Kevin on their presentations? Did want to say great job for both of you guys. Really appreciate it. I think those were really interesting, really valuable for folks to see some great approaches to two different problems, but both solved very cleverly. So good stuff. Good stuff.
Absolutely.
So if there aren't any other
You can
questions,
flip to the slides. So
I'll flip to the slides. I will flip to the slides. All right, so thanks again, Kevin and Sergey. Really great stuff. And then, as I've said before, if anybody has presentations they would like to do in the future, please just let us know. Really welcome that from the community. I think it's really good stuff. I don't see any other questions. Our next meeting, I did want to bring up, the next meeting would actually be scheduled for November 24th, which is a holiday here in the United States, so I will not be working, so we're going to go ahead and cancel that meeting. So the next meeting will now be December 8th. December 8th for the next meeting. We will pop up a slide on the 24th to remind folks again that the meeting was canceled, but December 8th will be the next meeting for the special interest group. So just heads up there, we don't really have a great way to update the calendar item, so just please make a note, please remember December 8th for the next meeting. And so for myself, for Vesa, for Bert, and for Sergey and Kevin, I want to say thanks, everybody. Thank you, Nigel. Happy Thanksgiving to you as well, in the spirit of Thanksgiving. So everybody have a great weekend, and look forward to talking to you in December. Take care.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys.